When your fantasy team needed them the most, so many studs let you down. Let's talk about them. Hey, welcome back, Endgame community. It's Chris, and today I'm going to talk about players who really let down in Week 15 and maybe have been letting down recently. And I'm going to let you know, should you or should you not be panicking about them, assuming you're still marching on in your fantasy playoffs, of course. Let's get into it. And last week I talked about Nick Chubb, and I said, I'm going to put the panic level at medium, but if he doesn't get it done next week, panic level will be high. And I think at this point, panic level has to be high. And look, it's not Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has still been real life good. That's the problem. Nick Chubb is real life good, and he's just fantasy okay because he doesn't catch a ton of passes, and he really needs those touchdowns. And this offense has somehow gotten worse with Deshaun Watson than it was with Jacoby Brissett. Nick Chubb not getting a lot of scoring opportunities, not catching any passes. The offense looks bad. He's now gone under 10 PPR points in 3 straight games with Deshaun Watson. And now he gets New Orleans, who's a tough run defense, and then Washington, who is one of the toughest run defenses if you somehow make it to your championship game with Nick Chubb. I said it last week. If I had to talk about him again, I was raising the panic level. Panic level has to be high on Nick Chubb if you're still rolling with him in your fantasy team. All right, and then Week 15 was supposed to be the week where Alvin Kamara was finally a good play in a good matchup. They were going to come out of the bye. They were going to get him more involved, and then they really didn't. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They got him way more involved in the running game, but still only 2 targets, only 2 catches. That is not what we want from Alvin Kamara. We want the receptions. That's what gives him his massive ceiling. That's what gives him his massive upside. And this offense, kind of like with Nick Chubb, is not giving Alvin Kamara chances to score either. So, yeah, he had an okay game this week, but this was a great matchup against Atlanta. He gets another great matchup next week against Cleveland. But how much can you really trust Alvin Kamara even in another smash matchup? I'm not going to say Alvin Kamara is a guy you have to outright bench, but he's nothing more than like a low-end RB2 to me. Panic level's got to be high as well on Alvin Kamara. And then I guess it's safe to say at this point, it just is not going to be DeAndre Swift's year. I kind of like DeAndre Swift coming into this game. And like Alvin Kamara, he had an okay game. He did have 9 targets. But the problem is this Lions backfield is a 3-headed monster. It's not just Jamal Williams that DeAndre Swift is competing with. He's also competing with Justin Jackson. That's the problem here. If it was just him and Jamal, DeAndre Swift would probably be doing great. And we can't blame injury this week because he wasn't on the injury report at all this week. That's why I really liked Swift in this matchup. He didn't kill you, but kind of like Alvin Kamara, he didn't help you win either. You can't feel great about Swift going forward. Now, granted, this was a tough matchup against the Jets. He gets better matchups, but kind of like Alvin Kamara, I can't treat DeAndre Swift as anything more than a low-end RB2. Panic level also high for DeAndre Swift. And then Miles Sanders was in one of the most smash spots of the entire weekend, and he busted. And I don't mean busted, I mean he busted hard. Didn't even get you 2 PPR fantasy points, had a fumble. What happened to Miles Sanders this week? This is the Bears. He was supposed to run all over this defense. I don't know. I mean, I know the game kind of got away from him early with those 2 interceptions, but it wasn't like the Bears put it on him. They were still in this game. The Eagles were pretty much winning the entire game, even with those 2 early Jalen Hurts interceptions. But, I mean, this is just kind of what you get with Miles Sanders. He's a boom, bust running back. He'll probably go out there next week against Dallas and boom. Dallas definitely not the toughest matchup. That defense not looking good these days. I still think Miles Sanders is startable, but he is what he is. He's an RB2 that you put into your lineup. You know he could bust, but you know he could boom. So I'm going to put panic level medium on Miles Sanders. Just understand the risk when you start him. And then another guy who was supposed to boom in a smash spot was Isaiah Pacheco, and he didn't. And not only that, worse, he fumbled, and then he got benched. After he fumbled, we saw Ronald Jones getting run, and Jerick McKinnon once again won people matchups this week and looked incredible. But Pacheco did come back in the game later. He did get touches. He did get usage. He did look good when he wasn't fumbling. And he does get a great matchup again against Seattle this week. But, I mean, after what we've seen the last couple weeks, I still think Pacheco is startable, but it looks like McKinnon's the guy you want if you're shooting for the upside, which you should be shooting for the upside. But still, I can't be too worried about Pacheco. Pacheco's not like Alvin Kamara or Swift or Nick Chubb, a guy you're counting on to help you win your week. So I'm going to put the panic level low on Isaiah Pacheco. Gets another great matchup against Seattle next week. He should bounce back. And then finally, Zonovan Knight. We got so many questions about Zonovan Knight. And I was telling people, you can start him, but he's not one of my favorite starts this week because it's Detroit, and Detroit has been elite against running backs since their bye. Not good against running backs, elite. We've seen him shut down Dalvin Cook, shut down Saquon Barkley, shut down other good running backs. And they absolutely shut down Zonovan Knight this week, only 23 yards. Now, granted, he was technically the lead back. He did get more of the carries. But you know what wasn't there this week? Dump-offs, receptions, none of them. And any dump-offs there are from Zach Wilson, which there are far fewer than there are with Mike White, they go to Michael Carter. So Zonovan Knight, he does get a much better matchup here in Week 16 against the Jaguars. He should be better, but you just got to accept he is what he is. He's one of these touchdown-dependent guys, not going to give you a big yardage game, not going to give you a lot of catches, but he definitely can always score a touchdown. Again, kind of like on that fringe RB3, RB2 with touchdown upside kind of guy. I'm going to put panic level low here again because, again, he's not a guy you were relying on to be, your workhorse carrying your fantasy team, and he does get a better matchup in Week 16. All right, let's move on to wide receiver now, and what has happened to Stefon Diggs? 16 fantasy points over the last 2 games, and what was crazy is in this game that we saw on Saturday night, Josh Allen threw 4 touchdowns, and somehow none of them were to Diggs. It was total pain, right? We saw Quinton Morris, the backup tight end. We saw Dawson Knox, James Cook. I don't even know who the other guy who scored was. It was like a nobody that scored that I can't think of right now. But it's just a lot of pain with the touchdowns in that game. And he did miss Diggs on, a potential touchdown where they said he was wide open. It was a tough throw, but he could have hit him. But still, he's Stefon Diggs. If you're still alive with Stefon Diggs, or if you had a bye, which a lot of teams did, don't panic on Stefon Diggs. He'll be fine. He should bounce back. Josh Allen looked better. That's encouraging. Panic level definitely low for Stefon Diggs. And then another stud who has not been good the last 2 weeks is Davante Adams. He also only has 16 PPR points over the last 2 games. Now, 2 weeks ago, it was kind of like, okay, it was a tough matchup. Derek Carr wasn't very good. He barely threw the ball. That was excusable. But this was also a tough matchup, right? New England, a tough secondary. But Derek Carr, he was hitting Matt Collins. He had that touchdown to Keelan Cole. Darren Waller caught a long touchdown. I'm starting to wonder if there's just maybe too many targets here for Davante Adams to have that massive target share we saw him have for most of the season. Because remember, all they really had for most of the season was Davante Adams and Matt Collins and Foster Moreau. That was it. Hunter Renfrow was back, though he didn't really do anything. But I think Darren Waller being back is a little bit worrisome for Davante Adams, but still, he's an absolute stud. He gets Pittsburgh in Week 16, then San Francisco. San Francisco, yes, they're a good defense, but they will give up points to wide receivers. Pittsburgh should not scare you at all. He's still a no doubt must start. Panic level low for Davante Adams. And I talked about how Deshaun Watson is affecting Nick Chubb. What about Amari Cooper? He has also not scored more than 10 fantasy points in PPR leagues in the 3 games with Deshaun Watson, and he's been overshadowed by Donovan Peoples-Jones in every single game. It looks like the connection between Deshaun Watson and Peoples-Jones is there more than it is with Amari Cooper. That should be worrying. Also, like I said when I talked about Nick Chubb, this offense has somehow gotten worse with Deshaun Watson. I knew he would be rusty coming back after not playing football for almost 2 years. I didn't think he'd be this rusty and this bad, though. Apologies to anybody I told to start Deshaun Watson. I also started him in one league, so I feel your pain. But Amari Cooper, we got to be really worried here because, like I said, Donovan Peoples-Jones looks like the only player who's going to have any success with Deshaun Watson right now. So Amari Cooper, I got to put the panic level high. This is 3 games with Deshaun Watson now, and he's done nothing. Going to be very hard to trust going forward. And then another wide receiver that's very hard to trust right now is Chris Olave. He's only scored more than 13 PPR points once in the last 7 games, and this was a smash matchup against Atlanta. He was supposed to crush it, and he didn't. Juwan Johnson, 2 touchdowns. Raheed Shaheed had a long touchdown. I don't know. With Andy Dalton, the upside just isn't there, right? They're not going to throw it 40, 35, even 30 times in a game. Yes, he can always hit on that big, long touchdown like we saw him do maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. But without that, he really doesn't give you a whole lot. I think we have to start looking at Chris Olave as more as just a, wide receiver 3 with a little bit of upside. So definitely panic level high on Chris Olave. And then when Jimmy G went down with that injury, I was very nervous for Brandon Ayuk. But that first game with Brock Purdy, it seemed to be okay because he scored that touchdown. But I think what people lost in that touchdown was it only came after Deebo Samuel got hurt. If you look at that the targets before Deebo got hurt, it was all Deebo and George Kittle. Brock Purdy was not targeting Brandon Ayuk at all. Then Deebo goes out and he gets that target and that touchdown. So people felt like, okay, I can start him this week. But I don't think you can. I don't think Brandon Ayuk is startable because look at the targets on Thursday in that game against Seattle. It was almost all Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, very little for the wide receivers. And that's the problem. This is already a low volume passing attack. It's going to be even more low volume now with Brock Purdy because they're just going to lean on that defense and let him, make easy throws to Kittle, easy throws to CMC, and let those guys do their work after the catch. For me, Brandon Ayuk, you want to start him, go for it, but to me, way too risky right now. Brandon Ayuk is a sit for me the rest of the season, panic level high. And then finally, another wide receiver that was supposed to boom this week and didn't was Mike Williams against the Tennessee Titans, a defense that you just really are not supposed to be able to run the ball on and have no problem throwing on. The Chargers struggled to throw the ball. I'm going to talk about Herbert here in a second. But before we get to that, Mike Williams, he did kind of save his day with that last second big gain that got him into field goal range. But prior to that was doing really nothing. Had only had like 2 catches prior to that. Wasn't really getting open, wasn't getting separation. But this is Mike Williams. This is who he is. He's a very boom, bust kind of receiver. Now next week's going to be a little tough for him because he is going to get that Stephon Gilmore matchup against Indy. I think it's going to be a huge Keenan Allen week out of the slot. But still, he's got tremendous weekly upside. I don't think you can bench him. Got to be a little nervous about him next week, but week 17 he should be better. So I'm going to put panic level medium on Mike Williams. Now let's move on to tight end, and I got to talk about Mark Andrews again because he did nothing again. And he's going to be one of the toughest decisions we have to make in week 16 because there's a potential for Lamar Jackson to be back, and he's playing the Falcons. It's going to be very hard to sit Mark Andrews with Lamar Jackson against the Falcons, but it's also going to be very hard to trust Mark Andrews with what we've seen recently from Mark Andrews. But look, the tight end landscape is a mess. There's not a lot of guys out there you can feel good about week in and week out. Pat Freiermuth just gave you a goose egg this week and lost you your week probably. So I think in this matchup, if Lamar Jackson is back, you almost kind of have to trust him based on your options. Not a must start by any stretch, but man, you got to be terrified and the panic level has to be high here. And then I just mentioned Pat Freiermuth. Let's talk about Pat Freiermuth and that goose egg. In the most important game of the year, he gave you a goose egg. And look, we were a little nervous about Mitch Trubisky. Like, would he target? How would the targets go? Who would get this? Who would do this? Would they do anything? I didn't expect a 0 from Pat Freiermuth. That is pretty alarming. Now, on the plus side, Kenny Pickett will hopefully be back next week. I know there was some hope that he would play this week. It was a concussion. Hopefully we'll see him back next week, and you can feel a little bit better about him. So I'm going to put the panic level low on Pat Freiermuth, but just know, if it's Mitch Trubisky again next week, I am absolutely benching him. And then finally on the quarterback, already talked about Justin Herbert, but let's talk more about Justin Herbert. In a matchup where you really have to throw the ball, this is a defense that just begs you to throw the ball against him. Did very little, saved his day, kind of, not really, with that long Mike Williams throw at the end. Only had 1 touchdown. Not really what you were looking for from Justin Herbert this week. This was a great matchup for him. He had all his weapons healthy, right? Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Gerald Everett, Josh Palmer, Austin Eckler. There's no excuse for this. I don't know what to make of this. This was one of the biggest letdowns of the week, no doubt about it. Now they go on the road to Indy. But we did just see Kirk Cousins light this defense up, so I think you can feel pretty good about them. They'll be indoors. They'll be in the dome. Certainly got to be a little nervous, but I'm only going to put the panic level medium on Justin Herbert. And I talked about Deshaun Watson already, but let's talk about Deshaun Watson some more. It's not going to happen for Deshaun Watson this year. He's got 2 weeks to try to get it right for your fantasy team. Are you really going to bank on Deshaun Watson? Look, at this point in the season, you should be one of only 4 teams left standing. You shouldn't need Deshaun Watson. I hope you don't need Deshaun Watson. I am absolutely dropping Deshaun Watson in the one league where I had him and somehow still won. I'm not going to start Deshaun Watson. He looks rusty. He looks off. He's definitely not an elite quarterback. Maybe next year he'll get it together, but this year it's over. Panic level high, you can drop Deshaun Watson. All right, now that you know some players maybe you should or should not be panicking about heading into your semifinals, what about who to pick up off waiver wire? Who to start, who to sit, who could boom? We got you covered. Everything you need to win your Week 16 matchup. Check out our playlist right here.